Joining me now is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She, of course, famously won her primary in New York, defeating the fourth most powerful Democrat in the House, Joe Crowley. She's going on to the general election in 21 days. Alexandria, welcome back to the Young Turks Network.
Hi, it's great to be back. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, great to have you back. So I think it's fair to say that you stand an excellent chance of winning the general election. So I wanted to ask you about your plans for the future and the plans for progressives and just Democrats as well. So first, a question that might be fairly straightforward for others, but in your case, with all of your priorities, it's a very interesting one. Committee assignments, are there any that you're particularly looking forward to or would want to be on?
Yeah, there's a lot of phenomenal committees that would be great to sit on, particularly for the progressive movement. For our district and my district in New York 14, there's a couple that I think would be really great. Education and labor is one. Natural resources or energy and commerce would be great to address some of our Green New Deal legislation that would really include broad reforms to education, jobs, housing, and wages. And so I think natural resources, energy and commerce, education and labor, and of course, oversight so that we can have more accountability in the role of money in politics. These are all really important agenda items.
I like the sound of every one of those, including oversight. That sounds fantastic, especially with the systemic corruption that we have, unfortunately, dominating Washington right now. You mentioned Green New Deal there. Let's talk a little bit about that. What is the Green New Deal?
So one of the things that we're working on is essentially 21st century New Deal legislation. But instead of mobilizing our economy around war, we need to have that kind of broad mass mobilization so that we can really transition to 100% renewables as quickly as possible. The IPCC released a report about last week or earlier this week that said we basically have 12 years left to address climate change, or else future generations will experience cataclysmic consequences. And so for me, this is an existential issue. We need wartime mobilization around climate change, and that level of economic mobilization is going to be required. And in the same way that we have an urgency when we mobilize entire economies around existential war crises or threats, I don't see any larger threat to our existence than climate change, and it's going to take a really full economic mobilization in order for us to address it.
So, Alexandria, I'm not asking this in a CNN way. I genuinely want to know, Green New Deal, how much do you think makes sense to spend on a program like that? And what do you think would be the economic benefits as well as the cost that would accrue from that?
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about Green New Deal, it's so much bigger than just switching to renewable energy. It's so much more than just switching to electric cars. What we're really talking about is an overhaul of our education system for us. And that's one of the reasons why sometimes I hesitate to call it a Green New Deal. What it really is 21st century New Deal legislation that focuses on renewable energy. We're mobilizing the economy towards updating our energy, but 21st century New Deal, it includes a federal jobs guarantee. It includes, and a federal jobs guarantee, by the way, includes a $15 minimum wage. It includes paid health care and child and sick leave. We're talking about universal child care. We're talking about expanding trade schools so that people can much more easily transition away from working in the coal industry or the fossil fuel industry and towards working on solar panels. For me, I think that it deserves all of the resources possible that we have. Like when we think about what government is useful for, it should be used to improve the lives of everyday people. And I really don't think that there is a price tag on our survival when it comes to global warming and climate change.
When you say job guarantee, for the people who are not familiar with that, what does that mean?
So a federal jobs guarantee is really exciting legislation. What it basically does is that it guarantees a minimum quality of work, of labor rather, or minimum quality of jobs that creates essentially a public option for employment. So a federal jobs guarantee means that we can create employment. You can opt into a public option for employment that guarantees a $15 minimum wage, paid child and family sick leave, as well as paid health care. Medicare for all could be a potential component of it. And what that does is that it creates almost a public option competitor in the job market. So if you are being exploited at work, if you have a low wage job, if you are in an industry with a lot of harassment, for example, you can always opt out in and opt into the public option for employment. So if you are getting paid less than $15 an hour, you can opt into a public option for employment. So it's a really clever way of, while we try to pass a living wage, we'll also essentially create a competitor in the labor market so that people can always opt into a higher quality of work. And it basically forces the private sector to step it up. Because if a person has to choose between working at Walmart for $7 an hour or opt into a federal jobs guarantee program for $15 an hour, they're all going to work in the federal jobs guarantee, and it'll essentially force Walmart to pay more in wages in order for them to keep up with the demand for jobs.
So oftentimes the Republicans paint people taking advantage, what they would call advantage of government programs, as bums. But in this case, you literally have to work for it. It is a job and you have to show up to work to be able to get paid. I'm not misunderstanding that, right?
No, not at all. And in fact, it opens up employment for so many people, because there are so many people that are not in the labor market right now, that aren't being counted, many would argue, in unemployment rates, because they're either underemployed or they have given up on looking for work. And what a federal jobs guarantee does is that it guarantees employment. It'll give you paid health care, child and family sick leave, a minimum wage of employment. And mind you, when we talk about people who are taking public assistance, there is no greater recipient of public assistance than mass corporations like Walmart, and up until very recently, Amazon, which depended on food stamps in order to compensate to make up the gap, because they were paying their employees so little that they couldn't live off of these wages. And so to me, when we talk about raising the minimum wage, this is a cost-saving measure for government, because when we mandate an increase in minimum wage, when we make the minimum wage a living wage, then that means that we're going to have far less people seeking public assistance on food stamps and Medicaid, because they're actually being paid enough to live. Because right now, you look at Walmart, that's employing so many people in this country, and there are lots of people that work for Walmart that also rely on things like food stamps and government programs. So if we mandate a higher minimum wage, either through competition or just through federal legislation, we're going to see our enrollment in public programs, decrease.
Well, theoretically, conservatives should also like it, because it could lead to higher wages. That's good for everybody. But also, then people have no excuse for not working. And because they're guaranteed a job. So it should be a win-win for everybody, and then you could do infrastructure, et cetera. But my guess is that it will not be perceived that way by the people in charge in the Republican Party, or honestly in the mainstream media. So now let's talk about the Democratic Party and what you think their focus should be in two ways. One is in Congress in just 3 weeks, when you likely win the election. And also for 2020, what do you think the focus of the Democratic Party should be?
I think that the focus of the Democratic Party should be in improving the lives of working class Americans, period. That means making sure that we are focusing on single payer universal health care. That means that we should have hard commitments on not taking corporate money. It means that we need a hard commitment on tuition-free public colleges and trade schools. It means that we need to address our system of mass incarceration and end the war on drugs. And it means that we need to address our broken immigration system that is allowing the current administration to violate so many children's human rights by detaining them at our border. And I I think that to me, it's very straightforward. We need to make people's lives better. We need to increase wages. We need to improve jobs. We need to extend healthcare as a human right. And we need to reject corporate money. And anything else is, largely a distraction. And we shouldn't be worrying about any of the things that Republicans don't not only not worry about, but freely violate. This idea that we're going to be hamstrung by how are you going to pay for it in order to mitigate our ideas and our platform is outrageous. Does anyone ask the GOP how they're going to pay for their $2 trillion tax cut? Did anyone ask the GOP how they're going to pay for their additional $4 trillion tax cut, which the news didn't even pick up recently, that passed the House of Representatives? No one asked these questions when it comes to the Republican agenda. Yet, I feel, our party has to somehow, even in larger races, have to somehow cut back on our vision. And I don't think that campaigns are the time for us to cut back on our vision. It's our time to be the most ambitious that we could possibly be.
So it is a curious phenomenon. And now that you've done so many media interviews, obviously not before your race when they wouldn't give you the the time of day, but now afterwards. Thank you. But it is curious that whenever you propose a program to help the average American, higher wages, health care for their families, people, and this has happened to you personally on a number of occasions, and not Fox News, but mainstream media outlets that are theoretically in the middle will jump down your throat and go, how dare you, how can you possibly pay for any of that stuff? But yet, when you prioritize rich people and giving them tax cuts, you don't get the same questions. When you start disastrous wars that cost us trillions of dollars, you don't get the same questions. So now, having experienced it, why do you think that is? Why do you think that the mainstream media is so predisposed to being skeptical about progressive priorities and what appears to be welcoming and, or at the bare minimum, unskeptical about Republican priorities?
Well, part of it, I think sometimes is that if you are a mass corporation, and even if you're neutral, if there's legislation out there that will cut your taxes, it's kind of difficult to be unbiased in that situation where you're being, personally impacted, especially when we talk about the 1% of mega corporations paying their fair share. That includes a lot of media corporations and conglomerates as well, which, by the way, are also becoming monopolies. There was much greater competition in the media market just a few short decades ago, and now what we're starting to see is the slow but sure consolidation of media outlets, whether it's Rupert Murdoch and whether it's Fox News starting to potentially congeal with many other news outlets, or the other way around. Is that what we're seeing is these multi-billion and multi-million and in some cases billion-dollar media corporations. Sometimes they stand to have their taxes raised as well. So I don't know if that's a part of it or what, but we've been here before. These are not new ideas. We have had higher tax rates, and you know what happened when we taxed the rich at a very high rate? We went to the moon. We established Social Security. We electrified the country. And when we put working people first and we try to advance and guarantee a basic level of dignity in this country, we advance. And, that's my opinion. That's my story. I'm sticking to it.
Yeah.
But,
I haven't actually heard it quite put that way. And even me, after all these years, I'm conditioned to think like, well, don't say higher taxes, right? Now, but it is. And there's nothing wrong with that. You're right. I never thought about it, but we put a man on the moon doing that. And I want people to understand it's marginal tax rates. So
that's right.
And under Eisenhower, Republican president, the highest tax rate in this country was 91%. But that doesn't mean that everybody was being taxed 91%. No, only every marginal dollar above a huge number, right? So it actually applied to very few people on some of their income, not all of their income, and it worked. We had the #1 economy in the world at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. This is not about the average, person's costs going up, or the average person's that the average person's taxes going up. You look at Medicare for all, the vast majority of Americans will see their health costs decrease. The average American pays about $10,000 a year in their medical costs, and what we're really seeing is that when we look at the cost breakdowns for Medicare for all, the vast majority of Americans will experience cost savings, and your costs will only potentially change if you make more than $250,000 per year, and even then, it's only under certain circumstances. So what we're talking about is preventing the increased inequality that's happening. And what we're saying is that there is a certain point at which, when the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, we need to intervene. So if you're trying to make your $10 millionth of the year, that $10 millionth is going to get taxed way higher. It just is, and it's going to impact such a small percentage of Americans that we're not even going to notice. But But the folks who aren't getting poor that isn't going to get poorer is definitely going to notice it.
Yes, and of course it also circulates in the economy. So I'm curious if you think we're winning on progressive priorities, because mainstream media, obviously we just had that discussion. No, not necessarily winning yet, in my opinion. And most of the Democratic Party are still not at the positions that you stated. But is there an argument to be made that progressives are winning overall?
Yeah, I think that one would be harder pressed to say that progressives aren't winning right now. You look at where our message is with the American people, with the actual electorate. Forget elected officials for a moment. When you look at the actual American people, 70% of Americans are now approving of Medicare for all. And that includes a majority of Republican voters. We're now at 52% of Republicans who want Medicare for all. We're getting majorities in tuition-free public college. Earlier this year, abolish ICE was an extremely fringe position that wasn't even polled. Now we have majorities of Democrats who either approve of abolishing ICE or disapprove of ICE overall. And now we're at up to 20% of Republican voters who support abolishing ICE right now. We went from 0 to 20% of Republicans. So I think that we're actually gaining a ton of ground, and that gain in ground may not be reflected in the media that we consume, but it's absolutely the truth on the ground. And it's what I see when I'm organizing. When I went to go visit Abdul El-Sayed in Michigan, or James Thompson, who won his primary in Kansas, these are places that are in deep red districts or swing districts. And it's exactly these priorities that American people are asking us to pass. So I think we won. And I think we continue to win on this message because we're fighting for what is right. And I think that what is right eventually is what will win in this country if we work for it.
I love it. I hope we don't get tired of winning. So look, and I want the audience to understand, of course, there's still a long way to go in pushing the Democratic Party to the right place, let alone all of Congress and et cetera. But it's a hell of a thing. I mean, and I did not know that stat, Alexandria, that 20% of Republicans now want to abolish ICE.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to me, what that says is, it's amazing what you could accomplish if you just try, if you make the case. And so, and that I have said often on the show, which is, and it was a problem for establishment Democrats for as long as I've been doing this show, which is a long time. They never make their case. So if you make your case, you can make a big, big difference. So I'll end on this then. The question is, speaking of making your case, you've got the Justice Democrats that are going into Congress. Now you already have 3 incumbents: Pramila Jayapal, Raul Grijalva, and Ro Khanna. And it looks like at least 4 of you are definitely going to win. You, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, and Ayanna Pressley. And then many others have an excellent chance of winning, whether it's James Thompson or so many others across the country. There's 26 candidates still in the general elections. So if you have a caucus, what's your plan for the Justice Democrats?
I think one of the things that we'll definitely need to do is be the party, or at least be the cohort that makes the case. I think that right now we're operating way too much in other people's frames, and we can be the cohort of people that makes the case for the broad agenda that, frankly, the American people are asking us to advance. And I think that what we can do is we can inject a lot more political courage in our system. I think there's a lot of fear-based decision making, and we need to come from a place of strength. And I think that if there's anything that the Justice Democrats embody, it's the strength of our mission and the confidence of our platform, because ultimately we know that what we're doing is right. And it doesn't matter it doesn't matter about the short-term consequences or what's politically popular in the short term. We are concerned with what the right thing to do is. And I think, and I hope that, it's one of my goals, but I know that all of us, we hope to be just a voice of moral clarity, not just within the party, but within Congress overall.
So obviously I didn't know you were going to say that, but I have to say I love that one too. That one of my personal slogan used to be for a long time: proceed from strength. And and so when you have strong progressives that are uncorrupted, which is the whole point of Just Democrats, making a strong case for progressive priorities, it's going to be fascinating to see what happens in Congress, to see how the media reacts to it, and I for a long time we have not had progressives in power in this country, and the fact that you guys are about to seize some power and a growing slice of the pie is going to be something to behold. So this time around, whether it's unfortunately some of the mainstream media seem biased against it, or the Republicans, they better brace for impact.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's not forget how JD started. JD started with, right here on TYT, viewers and supporters. We laid out kind of this grand vision. And at the time, it was just that. It was just an idea, but it was a feeling like we had to do something in this cycle, and we had to do something in order to make sure that the progressive movement had an avenue of power in the 2018 midterm elections. But it was just an idea. And it was up, and TYT viewers and supporters, and just JD viewers and supporters, people who heard and saw the idea, came out and they supported it with small dollar average contributions. And then they went on to fund many campaigns with small dollar average contributions. To this day, my average contribution is $28. And I know that JD's average contribution must be around there too. And it was just with that early cohort of people who believed that we now have 4 overwhelmingly favored candidates to be seated in Congress, and potentially more once November 6th rolls around. So we always have to remember that it's a small group of people who believe that always change the world and always change this country, and never think that just because we're not at 52% or 60% that we're losing. Really, it's so long as we're trying, we're making advances.
Yeah, and this is just the beginning, just like we said, and it's a hell of a beginning. I'm not sure anyone expected it to be this strong right from the get-go. So if you thought 2018 was good, wait till you get a load of 2020. So Alexandria, thank you for joining us on the Young Turks again, and probably the last time we'll talk to you before I introduce you next time as Representative Ocasio-Cortez.
Knock on wood.
Yes, indeed. All right, thank you.